My daughter-in-law forged my signature and listed my car for sale. My son called it a misstep. I called it theft. They used my house, my name, my silence to build their version of success. So I revoked the trust, filed the lien, and changed the locks. Now they say I ruined the family, but all I did was stop financing my own erasure. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. It wasn't the car that mattered, it was how fast she claimed it. Margaret had always believed that generosity, when given without strings, came with a quiet dignity. But staring at her iPad, fingers hovering above the cool glass, that belief began to buckle under the weight of something heavier. Entitlement, perhaps, or erasure more precisely. The message came on a Tuesday morning while she was repotting her ferns. Sandra, a woman from her gardening co-op with a reputation for gentle nosiness, had texted her a screenshot with a single line. "Congrats to Courtney, that your car?" No emojis, no sarcasm, just a genuine question asked with an undercurrent of suspicion. Margaret tapped the image open. It was a LinkedIn post. Courtney's latest update, time-stamped just hours ago. Her daughter-in-law stood in front of Margaret's silver Lexus, hand on hip, beaming like the car was a trophy and she the champion. The caption read, "Landed the job, so thankful for my ride. It got me through this chapter." Margaret stared at the screen for a long time, long enough that her tea cooled beside her untouched. She reread the caption twice. Her name wasn't there. No, thanks to my wonderful mother-in-law. No, borrowed blessing. Just the implication of ownership, dressed up in gratitude, broadcast to hundreds of digital connections who didn't know, who would now never know, that the car wasn't hers to claim. That evening, the house buzzed with congratulations. Margaret had prepared dinner as usual, grilled salmon, couscous with parsley, and a small salad with cherry tomatoes she'd picked herself that morning. Courtney entered wearing the same outfit from the post, hair still perfectly curled from the interview. She set her purse down and poured a glass of wine before Margaret even sat. "They said my follow-through was impressive," Courtney shared with a triumphant smile. "Said I present myself as someone who handles her own life, like I don't rely on anyone." Margaret lifted her fork, paused, then gently placed it down. She didn't speak. Ethan, ever the bridge, added a cheerful, "That's great, babe," and continued eating. Throughout the meal, Courtney spoke of her new team, the office views, and her own ambition as though none of it had a history. No stepping stones, no borrowed help, just pure, organic hustle. Margaret said nothing. She didn't mention the keys she'd offered so willingly, or the careful wash she'd given the Lexus before handing it over. Not even when Courtney called it "my lucky ride." Later, alone in her bedroom, Margaret sat with the iPad in her lap. The soft glow lit her face as she opened her auto insurance portal. Her Lexus 2019 ES350 appeared on the screen with all the relevant policy details. Clean title, excellent maintenance record, and one listed secondary driver, Courtney Wilder. She stared at that name. Then, without a sigh, without anger, she clicked "Remove." A small pop-up appeared. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" Margaret pressed "Yes." The screen refreshed. The name vanished. She closed the iPad, leaned back against the headboard, and let the silence in the room settle around her like insulation. There was no dramatic music, no cinematic sting, just the slow shift of power back into her hands. In the living room, she could still hear Courtney's laugh. It was the same laugh she'd used in her wedding speech when she thanked her village without naming anyone in particular. Margaret opened her phone once more and scrolled through her photos until she found the one from the day of the interview, a candid shot she'd taken through the kitchen window. Courtney adjusting her blazer in the driveway, lips pressed tight, nerves raw. Margaret had captured the moment not as a critique, but as a quiet record. Proof that someone had supported her, that she hadn't done it all alone. She deleted the photo. Just before midnight, a message buzzed through. "Courtney, mind if I take the car again tomorrow? Just a little celebration drive." Margaret stared at the text. She didn't reply. Instead, she reached for the alarm clock on her nightstand and set it for 6:45 a.m. Courtney texts, Mind if I take the car again tomorrow? Just a little celebration drive. She thought the wheels were hers. I remembered who signed the papers. The next morning, Margaret woke before the sun. Not because she had errands, not because she needed to be anywhere in particular, but because Courtney had assumed she wouldn't. She didn't reply to the text. Instead, she slid quietly out of bed, showered without rushing, and dressed with calm deliberation. By the time the coffee finished brewing, she already had her purse, her keys, and a tote bag with 3 library returns by the door. The Lexus waited in the driveway, silver glinting beneath soft morning light. Courtney's bedroom door was still closed when Margaret stepped outside, and she didn't glance back as she eased into the driver's seat. The air inside the car still carried traces of Courtney's perfume, vanilla and something floral, too sweet to be subtle. Margaret opened the windows slightly, letting the morning breeze roll through as she backed out. The motion felt purposeful, like reclaiming something that had gone silent. At the first red light, Margaret reached into the glove compartment to double-check her registration. Her fingers brushed against something unexpected. A small stack of papers, neatly tucked together with a gold paperclip. She pulled them out slowly. Courtney's resume. A glossy set of business cards. Her full name printed in bold script, along with the new job title, company logo, and Margaret's address, listed clearly underneath. Margaret read it twice. There was no typo. Her thumb slid across the resume's top page. Under a section labeled Personal Resources, Courtney had written, Private vehicle owner, self-managed transportation. No asterisk, no clarification. Just fact, stated plainly. The light turned green, but Margaret sat frozen for half a second longer, the words echoing like a quiet dare. Later that morning, she met her friend Joni at the cafe across from the library. They always chose the table by the window, the one that overlooked the flower shop's awning and caught the sun just after 10. Joni, sharp as ever despite her bifocals, picked up immediately on Margaret's quiet. "You're twitching your left thumb," she said, sipping her chamomile. "That's either car trouble or Courtney again." Margaret offered a small smile. "She used my address, claimed my car, built a whole narrative out of borrowed things." Joni raised her brows. "In print?" "On her resume, and I just found out she's been handing out business cards with my ZIP code." Joni whistled low. "Well, she didn't just borrow your Lexus, she's driving your identity." Margaret stirred her coffee slowly. "I'm starting to think she's better at marketing than I gave her credit for." Joni leaned back, eyes glinting. "List her off your will next. That's a start." Margaret didn't laugh. "Let me start with insurance, then we'll talk legacy." The conversation drifted for a bit, but Margaret's mind stayed rooted in an older memory, a flashback to Courtney's wedding day. During her speech, Courtney had thanked our amazing village and every woman who shaped us. There was no name, no eye contact, no hand on Margaret's shoulder, just a generic, forgettable phrase polished for a crowd. Margaret had smiled then. She remembered practicing that smile in the mirror afterward, just to see what it looked like without resentment. That afternoon, back home, Margaret sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop. The screen glowed white as she typed slowly into a search bar. Reporting false personal claims to HR. She didn't press enter yet. She just stared at the phrase like it might blink first. Then her inbox chimed. New email. From Courtney. No subject line. Just one embedded image. It was her new company bio, now live on their internal site. Her face smiled back from the screen, framed beside a short professional paragraph. Proud self-starter, independent creative, built her path from the ground up, with reliable transport and persistence. The photo? Courtney again, in front of the Lexus. Margaret leaned back in her chair and closed the lid of her laptop. She didn't react. Not yet. But the heat behind her ribs told her this wasn't about transportation anymore. This was about rewriting history. And Margaret still had the original draft. Margaret receives an email. Courtney added her job and car photo to the company's internal bio page. They say online life isn't real, but real consequences don't care. Margaret sat in the soft hum of early evening, the low tick of her mantel clock the only sound competing with the weight in her chest. The house was quiet. Not the peaceful kind. No, this quiet was surgical, calculating, the kind of silence you need when collecting proof. Her laptop screen glared bright against the dusk, tabs open like a roadmap of betrayal. LinkedIn, company site, Courtney's digital bio. The caption on her post still live. So grateful for the ride that carried me into this new chapter. Margaret's car in the photo. Her driveway. Her rosebush faintly visible behind the bumper. She clicked into the photo metadata. Location tags, timestamp, device model. All traceable. All hers. Her fingers moved faster now. Screenshot, screenshot, save, backup, then again to an external folder labeled Courtney Claims. Subfolders followed. CAR, RESUME, ADDRESSUSE, ONLINEPOSTS. Not dramatic, just documentation, the kind no one respects until they're asked to sign for it. She paused only once, halfway through the caption archive. Not to rest, but to reread the job listing Courtney had quoted in her interview, the one Margaret had printed and tucked into a kitchen drawer. Independent thinker, reliable, self-funded. Margaret nearly laughed aloud. The only thing Courtney had self-funded lately was a set of eyelash extensions and a hibiscus-scented car diffuser, now stinking up the Lexus. She clicked open her insurance dashboard and scrolled to the fine print. There it was, clear as a whistle under the additional driver section. Unlisted drivers involved in an incident may incur full liability to the policyholder. Translation: if Courtney drove again and so much as grazed a bumper, Margaret could be dragged with her, financially, legally, reputationally. The bitterness curled in her mouth like something burnt. She picked up her phone, tapped the name she hadn't called in nearly a year. Denise Howell, former HR consultant, now semi-retired in Oregon, and still razor-sharp when it came to corporate boundaries. Denise? Margaret's voice was steady. Well, if it isn't the most composed woman in our retirement book club, Denise chirped. What's going on? Margaret explained everything calmly. The LinkedIn post, the car photo, the internal bio, the resume line, all of it. Denise was quiet for a beat. Then, and she's at a fintech firm? Yes. With compliance policies? Yes. Denise exhaled. Then she's stupid, Margaret, or arrogant, maybe both. Either way, if she's using you for image building and tied it to a regulated firm, they deserve to know the truth. Margaret hesitated. Would it even matter? To HR? It matters. Because perception is reality until someone documents otherwise. You have documentation. The call ended 10 minutes later. Margaret typed for nearly an hour after that. No fluff, no emotion. Just a clean, surgical letter addressed to the company's HR department. She included the screenshots, the photo metadata, links to the job description, and a redacted copy of her vehicle registration. At the top of the email, she left the subject line blank, and instead of clicking send, she moved the draft into a folder titled Hold, Pending Action. She powered off her laptop, stood slowly, and stretched. Her body ached, but not from age, from containment. The sun had dipped low by then, bleeding orange along the horizon. She stepped outside to collect the mail, feeling the shift in the air, the faint bite of early fall carried on the breeze, mixed with the distant scent of someone grilling 2 houses down, and that's when she saw it. The scratch. Long, thin, diagonal, tracing across the passenger door of the Lexus like a scar someone wanted to leave just noticeable enough, not deep enough to key the metal. Just the paint. Just enough. No note. No apology. No witness. Margaret stood still for a long moment, her gaze fixed not on the damage, but on what it represented. She didn't run her fingers along the line. She didn't step back to inspect the angle. Instead, she turned and walked inside. She had screenshots, a letter in draft, and now, a motive. Margaret opens her door to find a scratch across the Lexus. No note. No witnesses. She called it a scratch. I called it the start of war. The line down the Lexus's side glinted in the late afternoon sun like a fresh wound. Margaret didn't speak when she saw it. She simply stood beside the car, arms folded, letting the moment etch itself into her memory. Inside the house, the front door swung open. "Oh my God," Courtney said, voice raised in faux concern. "Is that new?" "Probably just a tight parking job at the office yesterday. People in the city don't know how to use mirrors." Margaret turned, gave a tight nod. Courtney's tone brightened with practiced cheer. "Sorry, Ma, I didn't even notice. It's just the clear coat, right?" She offered a shrug so light it almost floated away. Margaret looked back at the car, the tiny curl of silver that caught at the tail end of the scratch. "Probably." Courtney disappeared into the house, and that was the end of the apology. Margaret waited until the weekend. She booked an appointment with a detailer she used to trust with her husband's Mustang. The kind of man who didn't speak much but handled paint like it was skin. By noon, the scratch was gone. But Margaret knew better. Removing the mark didn't undo what it meant. She stopped at a hardware store on the way home, walked the aisles until she found what she was really looking for: a discreet dash cam, low profile, motion activated, wired to start recording even if the engine wasn't on. A clerk offered to install it. Margaret declined. Back home, she sat in the garage, watched YouTube tutorials, and wired it in herself. Then she drove to her attorney's office. The waiting room smelled like pin, scented cleaner and old printer toner. She sat with her purse balanced in her lap, eyes on the door. When they called her name, she walked in with quiet precision. The changes to her trust documents were small but clear: updated vehicle clause, added security permissions, and one new provision. In the event of property misuse, legal decisions default to Margaret's discretion, not Ethan's. Afterward, she didn't drive straight home. Instead, she made a detour to Ethan's office, a low-rise architectural firm with frosted glass doors and coffee that always tasted like burnt hazelnut. He was surprised to see her. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing around as if already looking for an exit strategy. Margaret smiled. "Fine. Just had a question." "Shoot." "Do you think Courtney respects me?" Ethan paused, tapped his pen against the side of his mug. "I mean, you two are just different generations. That's all. You raised me different than she was raised." "That wasn't the question." He looked down. "I think she assumes a lot, but it's not personal. That's just how people are now." Margaret nodded. "Thank you." That night, she didn't sleep. Not fully. She moved between the quiet of the kitchen and the cooler air of her den, where the television played softly in the background. Just after midnight, she pulled out an old flash drive and connected it to her laptop. The family videos played in soft, grainy resolution. Ethan's 3rd birthday, Margaret laughing, cake frosting on her hands. Her late husband's voice behind the camera. A Thanksgiving years later. Courtney newly engaged, smiling, lifting a glass. "To the woman who raised the man of my dreams," she said. Margaret paused the video, watched her own face in the frozen frame. She looked surprised, not honored, just surprised. At 6:58 a.m., the light outside the window turned gold. Margaret opened her email drafts. The letter to Courtney's HR department still waited. She clicked on it. Her cursor hovered over the Schedule Send button. She tapped it. A small window appeared. Choose delivery time. She selected today, 9 a.m. sharp. Then she closed her laptop, made tea, and sat by the window as the sun lifted through the blinds. She didn't look at the Lexus parked outside. She didn't need to. Scheduled delivery timestamp hits 9 a.m. sharp. Next morning. She posted for clout. The company replied with protocol. The email left Margaret's inbox at exactly 9 a.m. The confirmation ping was quiet, nearly invisible. But to her, it echoed. Not like a gunshot, more like the precise click of a safety being taken off. That afternoon, Courtney came home earlier than usual. No purse, no coat, just her blazer folded over one arm and her work shoes in hand. She kicked them off near the door, barely muttered a hello, and went straight upstairs. The door to the guest room, her temporary home office, closed with an extra beat of tension. Margaret didn't ask. She ladled soup into bowls that evening like it was any other night. The clink of ceramic, the hush of the ladle scraping broth. Ethan talked about traffic. Courtney didn't speak at all until halfway through the meal. "The team had a surprise meeting today," she said, voice too light. "Compliance flagged my profile, something about brand image alignment." She gave a practiced laugh, one beat too loud. "They're tightening social stuff, I guess." Margaret nodded gently. "Ah, they're making me rework my online presence. It's annoying, but whatever." Ethan looked between them. "Did something happen?" he asked, slow and careful. Courtney speared a carrot with unnecessary force. "Some jealous intern probably sent a tip. You know how people are. Trigger happy with the whistle blowing." Margaret took a sip of her tea, letting the warmth coat her throat. "Yes, people can be like that." By the next morning, Courtney's LinkedIn post was gone. The caption that had once praised her ride and this journey had vanished without a trace, but Margaret, ever methodical, had already archived it in 2 formats, metadata included. Around noon, her phone buzzed. "Ethan. Ethan, did you say something to her employer?" "Margaret. Number." But I stopped covering for her. There was no reply. Later that evening, Margaret brewed a fresh pot of chamomile and let it steep while she sorted her mail. The silence in the house had changed. It wasn't just absence of noise, it was the sound of recalibration. A silence where every footstep upstairs felt sharper, measured, like someone trying not to betray tension with creaks in the floorboards. The following morning, Courtney stood at the kitchen counter staring at her work laptop like it was an artifact. She pressed the power button 3 times. Each time, the same result, a frozen screen and a blinking icon. "They locked my system," she muttered. Ethan glanced over. "IT issue?" "They said it's part of a security check. Just routine," she replied, voice tight. "They're checking device history, software installs, normal audit." "Doesn't sound normal," Ethan said. Margaret sliced a pear on the far side of the kitchen. "Did they say when it'll be resolved?" Courtney shrugged, eyes glued to the frozen screen. "They're reviewing things. I don't know, it's annoying." Margaret dropped the sliced pear into a bowl of lemon water to keep the flesh from browning. Best to let them work through it. That evening, Margaret took her tea to the back porch. The breeze was just crisp enough to bring in the scent of cut grass from a neighbor's yard. She sat with her slippers on, legs tucked beneath a light blanket, and looked out over the fence line. The same birds came back each year, landing on the same branches, unaware that everything beneath them had changed. She didn't feel victorious. She felt steady. She heard the knock around 8:30 p.m. Ethan's voice followed, low but insistent through the closed door. "Mom? You might want to sit down?" Margaret rose, slow and composed, placing her tea gently on the coaster. She walked to the door and opened it to find Ethan's expression twisted with conflicted concern. "She's blaming you," he said quietly. "To HR. She's filing a harassment claim." Margaret blinked. "For what?" Ethan exhaled. "She said you're interfering with her career, that you're manipulating things, undermining her professionally." Margaret didn't flinch. "I didn't manipulate anyone. I reported misuse of my name, my vehicle, and my property." "She says it's retaliation. For a scratch." Margaret looked him square in the eyes. "This isn't about the scratch." A silence stretched between them. Then she stepped aside. "Come in. Let's discuss what happens next." Ethan knocks on Margaret's door. "You might want to sit down." "She's blaming you for harassment." "She tried to frame me as toxic. I framed the conversation with evidence." The living room had been rearranged, 2 chairs angled too deliberately. A tray of tea and stale shortbread cookies sat on the coffee table like peace offerings from a negotiation that hadn't yet begun. Margaret entered last, her presence quiet but solid. Ethan sat upright, hands clasped between his knees. Courtney, already perched cross-legged on the sofa, held a mug she hadn't sipped from. The silence felt brittle. "Thanks for sitting down," Ethan began, his voice too polite. "We thought it might help to just talk." Courtney jumped in before Margaret could sit. "I just want to understand how things got this far," she said. "I never meant for all this drama. I was celebrating a milestone, and then suddenly I'm under investigation." Margaret settled into her chair slowly. "You celebrated by taking credit for something that wasn't yours." Courtney blinked. "I didn't take credit. I just posted a picture. People make assumptions online. That's not on me. Margaret reached into her tote and pulled out a manila folder, setting it calmly on the table. Courtney's eyes flicked to it. What's that supposed to be? Documentation, Margaret replied, opening the folder one slow page at a time. Screenshots of your LinkedIn post, the internal bio with the photo, your resume stating personal vehicle ownership, the metadata from the uploaded images which clearly links back to my address. Courtney's face flushed. This is petty. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Petty? Margaret interrupted, voice even. I didn't report you for taking a celebratory photo. I reported misrepresentation of personal property and potential liability under my name. She slid another page forward, including this, an insurance clause that states any damages or legal incidents caused by an unauthorized driver could impact my premiums or even result in denial of claims. Courtney stood abruptly. So what, you're trying to ruin me? You've hated me since day one. Margaret didn't flinch. I've offered you space, transportation, housing, and silence. This is the first time I've offered facts. Courtney's breath hitched, her chest rising and falling as if words failed her all at once. She looked to Ethan. Are you just gonna sit there? Ethan glanced at his mother, then back at his wife. You should have cleared it with her, Court. It's her car. Courtney scoffed, mouth open as if betrayal had a taste. Then she stormed out, her mug left untouched, the click of her boots like punctuation. Margaret stood and walked to the printer in the hallway. Moments later, she returned with 2 fresh pages, her latest insurance statement and the updated policy with Courtney's name officially removed. She placed them neatly on the table beside Ethan. If she's confused about ownership, Margaret said, she shouldn't be driving anything with my name on it. Ethan picked up the pages and nodded once. She won't touch it again. Margaret gave a small, sad smile. This isn't just about the car. He sighed. I know. She didn't expect him to choose, not yet, but the absence of defense was a start. Later that night, she placed the folder back in her lock, drawer, and brewed herself a cup of tea, chamomile and orange peel, the kind she saved for nights when silence needed warming. Just before bed, she opened the mailbox. Inside, a crisp white envelope with certified mail tape sealed across the top. Sender, Brookhaven Estates HOA. Subject, formal complaint filed, shared property harassment allegation. Margaret stood on the porch for a moment, envelope in hand, the night air brushing cold against her cheek. The stars above blinked back like indifferent witnesses. She tore it open with her thumb. Margaret receives a certified letter. Courtney has filed a formal complaint with HOA, claiming harassment over shared property. She parked in my space. I moved the boundary lines. The letter from the HOA came printed in an almost comically formal font, as if the typeface itself were judging Margaret's nerve. We request that you refrain from personal confrontations with fellow residents in shared community areas. Specifically, driveway and entry use must remain cooperative and civil. Margaret read it once, then again. Cooperative, she muttered. Her tea cooled beside her. Her breath did not. Courtney had parked inches from the garage wall the night before, so close Margaret had to slide into the driver's seat of her Lexus from the passenger side like a circus act. She hadn't said a word, not out loud anyway, but apparently silence had become a new kind of crime. She flipped to the second page of the letter. At the bottom, in italics, Courtney Wilder submitted a formal request to adjust driveway boundaries based on current parking patterns. Margaret's mouth went dry. She walked out to the driveway with a measuring tape and a camera. The concrete beneath her feet was familiar, every stain, every crack, hers. The original deed listed the full parcel. The shared part had been a courtesy, not a contract. Back inside, she dug through her file drawer until she found the trust certificate, then the title. Then the neighborhood plan from when she'd bought into Brookhaven Estates with her husband 20 years ago, when the cul-de-sac had no trees and her Lexus didn't exist. She scanned each document and uploaded them into a folder labeled Driveway Not Debatable. That evening, she submitted her own HOA rebuttal, 5 pages long. Attached, title, property map, trust paperwork, and a photo from last spring showing the car squarely in her zone, with Courtney nowhere in sight. By Thursday, the reversal arrived. The HOA apologized for the miscommunication and the confusion resulting from an unverified claim. Courtney was issued a written warning for misrepresentation. Margaret was thanked for her clarity. No neighbors came to apologize. But the next morning, Courtney parked 2 feet further from the garage and didn't speak when they passed each other on the way to the mailbox. Margaret didn't expect a thank you, she just expected accuracy. She went one step further, installed a lockbox in her coat closet for the car keys. Only she knew the code. Then she called a local electrician and had a motion sensor light installed above the driveway. "Want it bright?" he asked, testing the sensitivity. "Blinding," she said, smiling slightly, "and responsive." At night it cast a wide arc across the pavement, igniting like truth when someone stepped too close. The next week passed uneventfully, which was its own kind of grace. She read by the window. She rearranged the spice rack. She even played one round of Scrabble with Ethan, who offered to wash dishes afterward with quiet humility. Courtney didn't mention the HOA letter, but she'd started arriving home later, leaving earlier. The energy had shifted, but not for long. On Saturday morning, the phone rang just after 8. It was Joni, her oldest friend, sounding breathless. "Margaret, you sitting down? I'm making coffee." "Good, sit down anyway. Did you see this?" There was a pause. "Check Facebook Marketplace." Margaret walked to her desk, opened her laptop and typed, "For sale, lightly used Lexus RX, single owner, well-maintained, VIN available upon request." She clicked on the photo. There it was, her car, parked in the driveway, her driveway. Same scratch she'd had buffed out, same custom plate frame, same background, and Courtney, standing beside it like a used car queen. The price? $24,000. Margaret didn't blink. She took a screenshot, then 2 more, then messaged the seller anonymously. "Still available?" Courtney replied within minutes. "Still taking offers. It's technically my mother-in-law's, but she's not really using it." Margaret stared at the message. Her pulse didn't spike. Her jaw didn't clench. She just whispered to herself, "Technically ends today." She priced it like she owned it. I priced out the cost of humiliation. Margaret stared at the screen, the glow of her laptop painting sharp edges across her face in the early morning light. The post had just gone up, Facebook Marketplace, under a community group she follow, for estate furniture and seasonal wreaths. The listing headline was simple, almost smug. "Reliable Lexus, lightly driven, excellent condition." Beneath it, 3 photos. Her car, her driveway, her license plate, barely cropped out. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad before she clicked the description. It wasn't even subtle. "Great car, well-maintained by a responsible driver. Message for VIN or to schedule a test drive." Furious, but not shaken, Margaret opened a new browser tab and created a burner Facebook account. The profile photo was a generic golden retriever. She messaged the seller directly. "Hi, interested? Is the car yours, or are you selling for someone else?" The reply came less than 2 minutes later. "It's technically my mother-in-law's, but she's not using it and it's just sitting. We're handling the process for her." Margaret sat back in her chair, spine straightening, the simmering humiliation curdling into precision. She clicked the screenshot tool, capturing everything: photos, description, the entire exchange. Then she reached for her phone. "Elaine, I need to file something urgent," she said as her longtime attorney picked up. "Unauthorized attempt to sell my property. Yes, it's the car. Yes, again." Elaine's voice was dry, clipped. "Cease and desist?" "And possibly fraud," Margaret replied. "Send it to her and copy me." She hung up, walked calmly to her printer, and made a color copy of the screenshots. By the time the machine finished spitting out the pages, her tea had gone cold, but her resolve had heated. That evening, Ethan found Courtney pacing in their shared hallway, phone in hand, looking anxious. Margaret didn't eavesdrop. She stood in the kitchen, slicing lemon for her water with slow, steady movements. When Ethan finally approached, the guilt hung off him like an ill-fitting coat. "Mom," he said cautiously. Court says you might have misunderstood something about the car. Margaret didn't flinch. Did I misunderstand the listing? Or the attempt to hand out my VIN number like it was a giveaway prize? Ethan shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't trying to sell it, she just… Margaret didn't raise her voice, but she did lower her knife. She used my name, my property, without permission. I'm not confused. I'm just documenting. He looked like he wanted to defend his wife, but the air between them had shifted. The longer he stood in that kitchen, the more he realized Margaret hadn't snapped. She had simply drawn the line. I don't think she meant any harm, he mumbled. She meant control, Margaret said softly, and she's learning what it costs. The next morning, she was at the DMV 5 minutes before they opened. The autumn air was sharp, and she could smell the metallic tang of dew on the sidewalk as she waited. The doors opened with a beep, and she stepped inside, documents in hand. The clerk was polite, a young man with a buzz cut and allergy eyes. I need to confirm title ownership, she said, sliding her ID and current registration across the counter. He typed, glanced, then frowned. Give me just a moment. Margaret stood still. The smell of cheap coffee and disinfectant lingered in the air. A low buzz of conversation hummed from nearby kiosks. Her pulse didn't race, but her fingers curled slightly around the strap of her purse. The clerk returned, expression tight. Did you know this vehicle is now registered in both your names? Margaret blinked once. I didn't authorize that. His tone didn't waver. It was filed last week. Electronic signature, joint registration. You'll need to file a dispute form if this was done in error. She didn't speak immediately, but her grip on the strap tightened. And somewhere beneath the stillness of her expression, something cold began to sharpen. She whispered to herself almost inaudibly. Let's see what else she forged. DMV agent says, Did you know this vehicle is now registered in both your names? She didn't just lie, she forged. The DMV's fluorescent lighting did nothing to soften the blow. Margaret stood at the counter, documents clutched to her chest, while the clerk retrieved the verification file from the back. When he returned, his tone was different, more cautious, more official. There's a digital authorization here, he said, swiveling the monitor slightly toward her. Electronic joint registration. It lists your name and one, Courtney Wilder, says the permission form was digitally signed, date stamped last Tuesday. Margaret's gaze didn't flinch, but her voice cooled to something glacial. I never signed anything, certainly not last Tuesday. The clerk paused, tapping a few keys. We'll need to escalate this internally. There's a fraud affidavit process. If the signature was forged, you'll want to file immediately. Margaret nodded once. Give me the form. She didn't fill it out at the DMV. She walked back to her car, and sat behind the wheel for several seconds without starting it. The sun had risen, but the chill the air cut deep, crisp and clean, like the truth. She could smell it. A mix of leather seats, faint lavender from an old air freshener, and betrayal. When she got home, she didn't say a word to Courtney, who was in the kitchen reheating coffee with one hand and scrolling through her phone with the other. Ethan was nowhere in sight. That was fine. Margaret didn't want an audience. She went straight to her office, printed the affidavit, and called Elaine. Fraud confirmed, she said into the receiver. Digital signature. DMV thinks it's official. I need it reversed and I want to add a clause. Restrict Courtney as a listed driver. Permanently. Elaine exhaled slowly on the other end. You understand this could escalate? Filing false registration can be a misdemeanor in this state, possibly more if we can prove intent. Margaret's reply was steel wrapped in silk. Then let it escalate. An hour later, the notary arrived, an older woman named Riva who smelled faintly of citrus and starch. Margaret laid out every document, original purchase, insurance policy, the DMV printouts, and now the notarized reaffirmation of sole ownership. The air in the room felt charged, like the brief pause before a summer thunderstorm. As Riva pressed the seal into the paper, she looked up and said gently, They always think they can do this quietly. Margaret gave a tight smile. And I've always been louder on paper. That evening, Ethan finally approached her. Margaret was watering the rosemary in the kitchen window box when he stepped into the frame, arms crossed, face pulled tight. She's scared, he said. She didn't think it was a big deal. She thought it would speed things up. Margaret didn't turn around. Fraud isn't a shortcut, Ethan. It's a choice. She panicked, he offered weakly. No, Margaret said, finally facing him. She calculated. There's a difference. And you? You're asking me to forgive a felony because it would keep the peace? I'm asking you to consider the fallout, he said, voice raw. She's my wife. Margaret's eyes softened only slightly. I raised you to know better. She didn't. Ethan said nothing. The next day, Margaret called her insurance provider and had Courtney flagged as a restricted non-driver. No access, no coverage, zero liability. Then she sent Elaine one final instruction. I want a clause added to the trust, she said, restraining order equivalent, no access to vehicle, title, or use for any purpose, present or future. Elaine paused. You're sure? Put it in writing, Margaret said. That night, her phone buzzed. A single text from Elaine. Elaine, filed, but one more thing. Want to press criminal charges or keep it civil? You'll have both. Margaret didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window where Courtney once posed beside the Lexus like it was hers. Then she typed, let's see how civil she stays. Lawyer replies, want to press criminal or keep it civil? You'll have both. She wanted status. I reminded her whose name was on the deed. Margaret ran her fingers across the edge of the walnut file cabinet, the one she hadn't opened since before Ethan's wedding. The metal clicked open like a vault unsealing history. From within came the home trust packet, cream-colored paper, still crisp, her name elegantly signed across the top. Sole purchaser, sole trustee, 51% interest held indefinitely, even after the amendment to accommodate temporary familial residence. Temporary. That word mattered. She sat down at the dining table and unfolded the packet. The house had been hers for 27 years, built from the ground up after her second promotion. The garden she'd designed planted before Ethan ever brought a girl home. She remembered standing in the foyer when Ethan and Courtney returned from their honeymoon, Courtney looking around like she'd just walked into a prize. It's a beautiful home, she'd said sweetly. Feels like it could be ours someday. Back then, Margaret laughed politely. Now she wasn't laughing. She picked up the phone and called a property attorney named Vance, a quiet man with an excellent memory and better boundaries. He had helped her restructure her estate after her husband passed. I'd like to outline residential usage parameters, she said. Considering eviction? Vance asked carefully. Not yet, Margaret replied, just clarifying the perimeter. Within the week, she had new house agreements printed. 4 pages. Clear, simple. Definitions of access, storage, garage use, vehicle permissions, and key issuance. It wasn't a contract. It was a map of respect. She left both copies on the kitchen counter. Courtney didn't touch hers. Ethan signed his without discussion and left it folded in Margaret's inbox tray. Courtney, however, breezed past it every morning like it was a menu she'd already ordered from. That Friday, Margaret moved the Lexus into the garage and lowered the door. The keypad lock was reprogrammed. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. The silence did enough. When Courtney tried to open the side door and found it locked, she said nothing aloud, but slammed the recycling bin hard enough to rattle the windows. Ethan noticed. But again, he said nothing. That evening, Margaret made a small pot of tea, sat by the window, and watched Courtney storm from room to room, her face flickering in the glass like a storm building. It used to make Margaret nervous, the way anger moved beneath Courtney's surface like a current. Now it made her still. That night, Margaret pulled out her leather-bound planner and made a list. Title still in my name. No signed cohabitation agreement. Proof of residency, mine. Occupancy, informal. She added a question at the bottom. If she keeps pushing, how far will she go? The answer arrived the next morning. Margaret's phone buzzed with a group text. Family thread. Her sister. Her niece. Even a second cousin she hadn't seen since a baby shower in 2008. The sender was Courtney. Message. I hate to say this, but I'm starting to worry about Margaret's mental state. She's been paranoid lately. Controlling. A few people have noticed. Just wondering, has anyone else experienced this? Margaret stared at the screen, the light cold and blue against her face. Her tea, untouched, had gone cold. There it was. Not a conversation, not a confrontation, a narrative. She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she copied the message and saved it under a new folder on her desktop. House rights, emotional framing evidence. Then she opened her calendar and marked next Tuesday. Consult Vance, formal options. Courtney had drawn her line in the group thread. Margaret was about to redraw the deed. Courtney sends a group text. Margaret's emotionally unstable. Anyone else experienced this? She curated a story. I corrected it line by line. Margaret didn't reply to the group text immediately. She let it breathe. Let the narrative Courtney had crafted hang in the digital air like a fog bank waiting to be cleared. Then, while the others were still trying to piece together what to believe, she began to gather her ammunition. No panic, no anger, just order. She opened her laptop and pulled up the folder she'd been building for weeks. It was labeled Asset Integrity, Personal. Inside, she had nested subfolders: Vehicle, HOA, House Title, Job Misrepresentation. Each one bristled with dated PDFs, screenshots, and digital receipts. Not one single emotion in sight. Just proof. Margaret composed her message slowly, carefully. She knew tone mattered. "Hi, everyone," she wrote. "Courtney's concerned about my behavior. I'd like to provide context. Please see attached documents that clarify vehicle ownership, household residency agreements, insurance updates, and HOA rulings." She attached 6 files. Each one quietly dismantled Courtney's storyline. The title deed to the house, the letter from the HOA reversing Courtney's driveway claim, a screenshot of the car insurance dashboard showing Margaret as sole owner, a photo of Courtney's job profile listing the Lexus as personal vehicle, the cease and desist letter from her attorney, the DMV email acknowledging forged registration documents. She ended the message with a line so calm it felt like closing a file drawer. "Facts over feelings. I hope this clears things up." Then she hit send. 10 minutes passed. No replies. Then one came in. From her niece. "This is embarrassing." For her, another followed. "Wow, I had no idea. Sorry, Margaret." After that silence, the kind that settles in when a room realizes it's been listening to the wrong voice. By sundown, Courtney had deleted all her social media profiles. No more filtered brunch shots. No more hashtags about generational healing. Just gone. Ethan came home with a quiet stiffness in his posture. He didn't hug Margaret, didn't even make eye contact at first. He dropped his keys on the console table and sighed. "She's upset," he said. Margaret kept chopping carrots, the sound of the knife rhythmic against the board. She made a public statement. "I made a factual correction." "I know," he said, finally looking at her. "Would it make things easier if we moved out for a little while? Just until it cools off?" Margaret set the knife down and wiped her hands. "You don't need to rush, but the lines don't move anymore. I hope that's clear." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it is." That night, Margaret sat at her desk and typed a short email to Vance, her attorney. Attached are digital copies of messages from today's group thread, just in case this turns into defamation. She hit send, then opened a small Amazon package she'd ordered 2 days prior, a brushed steel locking drawer with a hidden compartment. She installed it beneath her writing desk and moved 3 things inside: the car title, the notarized HOA documents, and the voice recorder she hadn't used yet, but might. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. As she closed the drawer, she felt something loosen in her shoulders. The story had shifted, not loudly, not all at once, but enough to reroute the wind. Later, while brushing her teeth, she glanced at the hallway mirror. Her reflection looked back, older maybe, but not worn down, in control, present. And then, on her way to bed, she passed the key hook by the door. 3 keys hung from it: mailbox, garage, spare bedroom. The 4th, the Lexus key, was gone. Again. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty hook, the hallway dim around her, the weight of quiet betrayal thickening in the space like humidity before a storm. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a break-in, a breach, a beginning. Margaret finds a key missing from her key hook. Again. She couldn't take no, so she tried to take the car. The space on the driveway was empty. Not just shifted, not misremembered. Empty. Margaret stood at the kitchen window with a sponge still damp in her hand and stared at the slab of exposed concrete where her Lexus had rested the night before. The garage door was still locked. No note. No sound. She set the sponge down slowly. She didn't call Ethan. She called the non-emergency police line. By the time Officer Morales arrived, the sun had tipped into late afternoon, and Margaret had already printed out the registration, the title, the cease and desist her attorney had filed, and Courtney's full name underlined in neat red ink. "She's not authorized to use the vehicle," Margaret said, her voice low and firm. "There's documentation." Morales, polite but slightly skeptical, nodded. "Did she have keys?" "She did. She no longer does. She took them without permission." Margaret didn't mention the missing key hook until she was asked. "Noticed last night," she said. "Didn't think she'd actually do it." The officer took notes. 2 hours later, they found the Lexus parked in a strip mall lot 10 miles across town, positioned at a slight angle outside a neon-lit bar. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't locked either. Courtney emerged from the bar's patio with a plastic cup and no shoes. "It's a misunderstanding," she told the officer with a slurred laugh that didn't land. "I thought we worked it out. I just needed it for an errand." When Officer Morales asked for clarification, Courtney flailed through half-sentences about shared property and not getting a straight answer from her. She referred to Margaret as the homeowner, like she was someone else's mother-in-law. Margaret met them at the lot in a second squad car. The officer handed her the keys. "Undamaged, but you should document everything." Margaret nodded. Courtney reached toward her as if to smooth things over. "It's not like I stole it?" Margaret didn't flinch. "You didn't have to. You already felt entitled to it." The officer issued a written warning. Unauthorized use of property. Nothing criminal. Yet. But it would be filed. Back home, Margaret moved like someone walking through an old house with fresh blueprints. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam a door. She unlocked the garage, drove the Lexus inside, and locked it behind her with a new deadbolt. The next morning, she installed a biometric steering lock and a small GPS tracking device beneath the dashboard, discreet but accurate. Her tech-savvy neighbor, Ray, helped her calibrate the app. "You want alerts if it moves more than 5 feet?" he asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Yes." She sat down with her laptop that night and drafted an insurance letter, attaching the formal police statement. Remove Courtney Wallace permanently from any eligibility as a secondary driver. Note attempted unauthorized usage, supporting documents attached. She hit send, then she opened a fresh document. Notice of termination of temporary residency, 30 days. Her lawyer, Vance, had prepared it weeks ago. All it needed was a signature. Margaret signed it, printed it, slid it under Courtney and Ethan's door. No conversation, just procedure. Later, Ethan found her in the kitchen. His face was flushed, eyes glassy. "Why now?" he asked, holding the letter. Margaret didn't look up from her tea. "Because you both asked me to trust you," and then she took something that wasn't hers. Again. "It's a mess," he whispered, voice cracking. Margaret turned to him. "Then clean it up." He didn't reply. He just stared at the floor as if the weight had finally landed somewhere inside him. That night, Margaret didn't sleep immediately. She sat on the sofa sipping chamomile, legs wrapped in a soft shawl. Rain started tapping the windows just after midnight, quiet and deliberate. She reached for her iPad and opened her email. A new message from Vance had just landed. Subject, property status update. Body, want to finalize the property transfer now? She stared at the screen, heartbeat steady. The room silent but alert. Because sometimes the final word isn't spoken. It's filed. The lawyer responds, "Want to finalize the property transfer now?" She wanted a vehicle for status. I gave her. A crash course in consequences. The line at the county clerk's office was long, but Margaret didn't mind. Her documents were organized, her signature steady. The manila folder resting against her side felt warm from her arm, not from worry. There was none left. When her number was called, she approached the window with the calm of someone submitting evidence, not a form. She slid the paperwork through the slot. Title transfer. Trust assignment. Beneficiary revisions. The clerk scanned them briefly, then asked, "Just you on the title now?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Only me. Always was." 10 minutes later, she walked out of the building with a receipt, a stamped copy of her trust, and a title deed that no longer had room for anyone else's name. Not Ethan's, certainly not Courtney's. The Lexus didn't last the week. It was gone by Saturday, sold to a retired postal worker who paid in a single bank-certified check and thanked Margaret twice for keeping it so clean. She'd posted it quietly through her lawyer's broker. No online drama, no bidding wars. She didn't want closure. She wanted it gone. In its place, a graphite blue hybrid SUV now sat in the garage. Sleek, discreet. Hers. No shared keys, no shared stories. She never told anyone she'd bought it. Instead, she began using it for rides around the neighborhood. Not rideshare apps, just real neighbors. Mrs. Covington to physical therapy, Mr. Ellis to the farmer's market, a widow named Ruth to choir practice every Thursday. "They appreciate the company more than the car," she told Joni over brunch. "They appreciate you," Joni said, sipping orange pico. Courtney never figured out the difference. By the end of the month, the guest room was empty, the sheets stripped, the closet door left ajar like they meant to come back. They didn't. Ethan texted once, "We'll send someone for the boxes." She never replied. The house regained its silence like a body exhaling. The thermostat finally stayed where she set it. The fridge hummed without passive-aggressive notes taped to shelves. And in the mornings, Margaret reclaimed a ritual that had once been hers: brewed coffee, open curtains, driveway unobstructed. She stood there often, just watching the sunlight slide across the concrete. Peace didn't feel like revenge, it felt like space. In her office, she updated every file: HOA logins, auto insurance, banking, emergency contacts, trust beneficiaries. The folders gleamed, digitally and physically, with one common thread: Courtney, removed. She also updated her phone settings. Do not disturb on. Exceptions, none. One evening after dinner, she sat on the porch with her tablet and scrolled through local art auctions. She wasn't planning on buying anything. She just liked the quiet. No footsteps overhead, no whispered arguments behind doors. A neighbor walked by and waved. "How's the new car?" Margaret smiled. "Purrs? Doesn't bite." The woman laughed. "That's rare these days." The next morning, Margaret found an envelope on the welcome mat. No handwriting, no postmark, just a typed return address: HR Department, Luma Financial Group. She stared at it for a long moment, the heat of the coffee in her hand slowly dimming. Luma. Courtney's new job. The envelope was thin. Professional, not vindictive. Still, Margaret didn't open it right away. She set it on her kitchen island, next to a small vase of fresh eucalyptus, and sat down with her planner. Appointments lined the pages: vet visit for Joni's dog, HOA meeting, tea with Ruth. Her life no longer orbited other people's expectations. Her car didn't either. Finally, she opened the envelope. Inside was a standard verification form: employment reference, personal reference, vehicle ownership verification. They were doing a background check, and Courtney had listed Margaret, her full name, her car, her relationship. Margaret ran her finger slowly down the form. Near the bottom was a section: "Please indicate if the information listed is accurate." She picked up her pen, signed her name, and ticked one final box: false representation, former vehicle owner, no consent given. As she slid the form back into its reply envelope, she paused just long enough to add a post-it note inside. It read, "She borrowed credibility. I'm repossessing it." She sealed it, stamped it, and smiled. Some letters burned bridges. This one rebuilt fences around her own peace. She receives an envelope, return address, Courtney's new employer. She used me as a stepping stone. I became her audit trail. The email arrived just after dawn, time-stamped 6:03 a.m., subject line: verification request, Courtney Elias. Margaret read it before the sun fully crested the oaks lining her back fence. The birds hadn't begun their full-throated chorus yet, and the kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon balm from last night's tea. But there it was, bold and clinical. Please verify the following applicant information as part of our onboarding process. Courtney had listed he as a character reference. Not just that, she had claimed Margaret's Lexus as a previously gifted asset from close family and cited family housing support during career development as part of her narrative. The form didn't leave much room for interpretation. Margaret read through the entire document once, slowly, then again, line by line. By the time she reached the bottom, the kettle had started to whistle. She poured water over loose green tea leaves and let it steep while she gathered the folder. It didn't take long. From a file drawer in her locked desk, she pulled out the tab marked Vehicle Documentation, Pre-Post Transfer. Then another labeled Housing Contribution, Temporary Use Agreements. And finally, Email Trail, Public Image Misuse. She scanned them quickly, confirming all dates matched. No anger touched her face as she printed a copy of the title, highlighting where only her name was listed. No hesitation marked her voice when she called the number on the email. A woman named Eliza answered, bright but guarded. "This is Margaret Pierce, returning your verification inquiry about Ms. Elias." "Oh, thank you, Ms. Pierce," Eliza said. "Courtney listed you as a reference and former cohabitant. There were some claims related to shared property, vehicle ownership, and long-term familial support. We're just checking facts." Margaret's tone was level. "Of course, I'm happy to clarify." She detailed everything simply. The car had never been gifted. Courtney was a guest in her home, not a co-owner. No formal support agreement existed, only temporary goodwill. A pause on the line, the faint tap of a keyboard. "Do you have anything in writing to support this?" "I have full documentation, titles, emails, and a notarized property trust agreement." Another pause. Then, "Thank you, Ms. Pierce. We appreciate your honesty." When the call ended, Margaret placed her documents back in the drawer with the same care one uses when shelving heirlooms. Then she poured her tea, walked to the patio door, and stepped into the cool morning air. The world was quiet. No slammed doors, no tension curled in the edges of her stomach, no pretending. Just the soft rustle of pine, the scent of damp wood, and the chirp of cardinals hopping along her fence. She sat with her mug and opened her tablet, logged into her private blog, and typed, slow and sure. "Protect your peace, even from family." She hit post. By lunchtime, there were dozens of replies. "This was me too. Thank you for saying it out loud." It's not bitterness, it's boundaries. Margaret didn't reply to them all, but she smiled quietly as she scrolled. Each comment was a match struck in solidarity, not flame, just light. That afternoon she folded laundry while jazz played softly from the kitchen speaker. The lavender dryer sheets made her favorite cardigan smell like a fresh room at a quiet inn. Freedom, she'd come to learn, had a scent, and a sound, and a stillness. Around 4, the doorbell rang. No package, no solicitor. Just an envelope on the mat. She bent to pick it up, joints stiffer than usual but stronger all the same. The return address read, "No sender." She opened it with a paring knife. Inside was a single sheet of lined stationery. The handwriting, shaky, unmistakable. "I didn't understand before. I do now. Ethan." Margaret read it twice, then folded it in half, walked back inside and slid it into a drawer marked "Forgiven, not forgotten." She didn't text him. She didn't need to. She had said everything that mattered in a quiet signature, and this time someone finally heard it. She receives a handwritten note. "I didn't understand before. I do now. Ethan." She borrowed my car. I reclaimed my power. The morning was so quiet, it almost felt disrespectful to break it with motion. Margaret stood at the threshold of the garage, bare feet against cold concrete, a steaming mug of black tea in one hand and the new key fob in the other. She pressed the button. With a soft electronic sigh, the lights on the sleek pearl gray hybrid SUV flicked on. The driver's side mirror unfolded like a slow wink. No scratches, no shared titles, no phantom fingerprints on the dash. This one, finally, was hers. She stepped closer, inhaling the faint, new plastic scent mixed with leather and that subtle trace of eucalyptus from the car wash she'd personally selected. Her fingers ran over the polished handle, no smudges, no second names on the paperwork, no ghosts in the glove box. The house behind her was still, no movement, no footsteps stomping upstairs, no passive-aggressive laughter from a back room, just sunlight pouring through the high window, streaking gold across the hood of the car like some celestial endorsement. She walked back inside, the key resting cool against her palm like a stone skipped across time. On the kitchen counter, the note still sat, Ethan's handwriting, careful and flawed. "I didn't understand before. I do now." She had read it the night before. And the night before that. The crease was already softened from handling, but she hadn't replied. Not because she didn't believe him, because she didn't need to respond to understand her worth. She poured herself more tea. The mug had a single phrase printed in delicate script: "Own the quiet." At the dining table, she powered on her laptop. A soft, mechanical hum greeted her, one of the few sounds that still felt neutral, safe. Her desktop background, once a photo of a family trip to Cape May, was now a field of wildflowers. No faces, no context, just space. She clicked open the blog draft folder titled Second Start Stories. It had started as a joke between her and Joni, a half-serious, half-hushed idea on a porch swing. What if we told the real stories? The after-50 stories. Not just love and grandkids. The ones with power plays, bank accounts, and remembering how to lock your doors again. Now it had a landing page, a tagline, "For every woman who learned too late and acted just in time." She typed the first post. "She borrowed my car." She rewrote the truth. So I rewrote the deed. I reclaimed the title, and not just the one in the glove compartment. I reclaimed mine, mother, widow, owner, and finally, no longer owned. She added one photo. The new driveway, empty except for one parked car, clean, still, dignified. She titled it, "Driven, Not Used." She clicked post. For the next 2 hours, she didn't check it. She went about her morning, fed the birds, vacuumed the front rug, answered 2 emails about her speaking event at the local women's center. By noon, the post had over 18,000 views, hundreds of comments. "This is me. I've never told anyone, but I had to co-sign on a car I never drove. I cried, then I changed my will." Margaret didn't reply to most. She didn't need to. The blog wasn't about applause. It was about accounting of every mile, every moment someone thought her silence meant approval. She closed the laptop gently. On the shelf above the table sat the old Lexus keys in a mason jar, still tagged but useless. A relic, a reminder, a receipt. She slid the jar behind a row of gardening books and replaced it with a framed quote from her father, printed in cursive script and etched into brushed steel. "You don't raise your voice when you own the building." At dusk, she walked the perimeter of her house, porch to garden to mailbox and back, her slippers quiet against the brick path. No motion sensor lights flicked on. No one watched her from a second-story window. The house no longer held guests who acted like landlords. It was hers now. All of it. Inside, the wind shifted gently through the cracked kitchen window. The scent of basil from the garden floated in. She paused by the door, one last glance at the night settling in, then turned off the porch light, not to hide, but to rest. Final line. Some women carry families. Some just carry keys.